Here we go, here we go, here we go. Episode 4 of the Grassy Knoll. Brian, Alex, Nick coming at you again. Brian was fortunate enough to sit down with Tom Vierheller, biology professor at KCTCS, formerly, to all you homebodies, PCC, only the real will know, in Prestonsburg, Kentucky. And what I took from that is if you vacation to South Florida, you've got some stuff to look out for when it goes underwater. Brian, am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a while, but it's coming. It's not going to be good.
So talk a little bit about what you guys went over, the cycles of the Earth, and how human actions and interactions are accelerating some of the natural cycles that we're used to, I guess.
Yeah, actually, to start out on the episode, with Tom, he showed this slide of a graph, and it showed, it was taken from ice core samples going back like 50 plus 5, I can't remember, it's like 50 plus thousand years ago. And they were able to measure the CO2 in the atmosphere. And it showed that there were natural cycles of more elements of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that increased the temperature. And then it shows, like, from the Industrial Revolution, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's insane. Like, it is the most insane it's like if you're looking at the stock market and it's like a big pump and dump when it just goes like straight up. That's what it looks like. And if you kind of relate that to stocks, you'll see it goes straight up and then it just drops. But we're not having that natural drop. We just keep doing it.
Accelerating.
And he talked a lot about how this is being accelerated through stuff like the palm oil farming and deforestation, that kind of stuff. It's really interesting. He's super smart, and I loved having him on here. We'll have him on again because there was stuff that I thought I should ask after the fact. But yeah, we hope you guys enjoy it. Yeah.
Check. Cut.
Run it. So what exactly is this case study?
Okay, so this topic is under climate change, and this particular slide of Florida is a case study of what would happen with climate change and sea level rise. So a lot of the Earth's water is in the form of ice, whether it's like in Greenland or Antarctica or other glacial ice forms. And then what this one is showing is that southern tip of Florida from Miami through the Everglades, what land areas would be lost and inundated with various levels of ocean rise due to rising temperatures.
So how far up actually is that as far as the sea level rise?
So there's another slide a little bit later. Okay. So the other graph goes up to about 1 meter. So, we science folks use this metric system.
Yeah.
So a meter is a little bit over 3 feet. So that these are projections for that kind of, where the blue is all covering there.
Yeah.
These are projections for like 2100.
Oh, wow.
But there's evidence right now. So as the folks see the podcast, you could go to like YouTube videos and things like that of like Miami Beach.
Yeah.
And the way the sea level has risen already, the effects it's having on those communities.
Well, I remember seeing stuff about Venice, how Venice now floods like daily. And it didn't do that, until fairly recently.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there's a lot of geophysics and things like this that differs, but coastal areas all over the world would be affected. And then, so here, this particular one there in southern Florida and like Miami Beach, but so they've had to re-engineer streets already and make plans. And so what'll happen is streets will flood, but it won't be like rains that we have around here. It'll just be like tidal conditions and things like that.
Mm. So do you think, since, this is a model for you, like you said, 2100, do you think that it's getting worse since we're seeing things like places already flooding, like Venice and like streets in Miami, stuff like that?
Yes.
Do you think it's like do you think the models need to be redone with like current, you know, data?
Let's go down. Can you go down 2 slides? Yeah. So, so what those are, so you can see that 1.0, that would be the 1 meter mark in 2100.
Yeah.
And then, so there's different estimates, but right now, like I think the way they've engineered it in Miami, you know, is like 2 inches per decade is what they're trying to, you know, what they're trying to compensate for. Yeah. So you can see, and of course with the coronavirus and science, we've heard a lot of the word models, haven't we, here the last 3 months? Well, that's what this climate change and its effect on coastal areas, those are models. And so just as in that graph right there, you can see, you know, different projections and models that's what these models are based on. So, but there is, you know, there's inundation and flooding. And then one other thing that happens in coastal areas is, especially in Florida with their sandy soil, where they have wells for fresh water. As the sea level rises and you get the seawater coming in, where they have to move their wells because you know they start pumping up saline salt water, what used to be fresh water. So there's,
I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, so in addition to the higher water levels and flooding like that, there's all sorts of implications to this, and it all has to do with, you know, the and you've probably seen pictures before of you know, where we came out of the last ice age and how things would have differed, and the ocean levels would have been lower because it would have been ice, and so we've been in a warming period since the last ice age, but then these effects of global warming are now accelerating it.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear that we're having an effect on the acceleration.
Yeah,
I think. I mean, I don't think there's any denying that.
I mean, I kind of kid. Every once in a while, you'll hear this thing that it's agreed on by 97% of the scientists, but whoever those other 3% are, I haven't met them.
Well, it's like the commercials for toothpaste, like 1 in 10 dentists, or 9 of 10 dentists, recommend this product. Who is the one that doesn't?
Yeah, right.
Like, what's this guy holding out for?
Right. Well, so there is a few in the field. I mean, I've really tried to study this as much as I can, and we'll get to some slides where my actual degree and work is in plant physiology and things like photosynthesis, and so I'm not trained in climate science like this, but I've really tried to study it and integrate it into my classes. And the 3%, when I've looked it up, would include maybe people from other fields.
Okay. It's not their expertise.
Yeah, they might be in physics or some other field that hasn't really studied this, and oftentimes, what they're going back to is, outdated models 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Do you see or have, an opinion on the fact that sometimes like scientists are paid by larger corporations to, not necessarily lie about results, but it's really easy to lie with statistics. I mean, for as good as they are, they're very easy to manipulate. And do you think that that's kind of a problem as to why there is this holdout, especially among like businesses and the government?
Yeah. So are you familiar with that Mark Twain quote, since you mentioned that? Or
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
There's lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics.
Well, that is, I've not heard that, but that is very true. I mean,
Okay.
there's a book whose the title of the book is How to Lie with Statistics.
Right. And one place this shows up is when you look at, and maybe we'll go through a couple slides here, we can see it, but the years you pick, it would be kind of like the stock market, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on what date you pick and what date you finish. So you can pick certain dates, and you can work your way around not seeing like temperature rise and things like that. But I mean, the overwhelming amount, and if people on the podcast, if they're not familiar with it, the topic that you just mentioned right here, you know, go Google or YouTubes and things like that of the tobacco industry, for example, in terms of, you know, who was paid to do what. The other thing I have found, though, is if you look up these days, the websites for energy companies, I mean, they will recognize climate change. So I don't know, you know, I'm not really satisfied in terms of what they're doing about it in terms of its impact, but they will recognize it in terms of like their mission statements and things like that.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot of these places, like the big people, Exxon, Halliburton, these kind of guys are hiring and looking towards, you know, changing everything into like a more green, centric thing. But they're still, you know, they're still drilling the oil and everything. So they're talking about it, but they're pushing it further back. And, you know, my worry, and you can tell me if this is crazy or not because you're way smarter and have studied it way more than me. I think it's going to be, or we're sort of on a precipice as to where it's going to be too late for these big companies to actually do something about it. And it's going to be so hard to steer the course to a manageable level.
Right. And that is a big debate right now in the field in terms of like what that tipping point would be. The news this summer is not good at all, actually, from the Arctic, that they're having record temperatures. And this is something that the folks you know can look up too on the podcast in terms of the record temperatures they're having in the Arctic and the melting and the tundra melting. And then there's another greenhouse gas. So we haven't mentioned that. The main greenhouse gas I was referring to here has been carbon dioxide so far in terms of fossil fuels. But methane is another.
Well, isn't that the big fear about places in Russia? The methane permafrost exactly releasing,
and that's happening this summer.
So you can kind of tell me if this is wrong, but does it kind of seem like larger cities are producing so much and it's affecting the continents, and the continents heating up, like, you know, and releasing things like methane from permafrost, stuff like that? That's what's really harming the Arctic.
Yes, because the temperature changes are not uniform. So what's happening is the Arctic and Antarctic regions are having higher temperature warming increases, and that's more critical because, you know, that's where the great ice melts are, or ice parts. So it's
that's going to raise the sea level.
Yes, that's right. And so and then kind of what you're referring to before a little bit, this tipping point would be if you did get to a point where, you know, the melting of the ice accelerates, and then this methane release from tundra, as you were referring to right there in the article you just had up from Russia, you know, would you know, further accelerate things. So we you know, we hope so that's actually in one of the debates. Now, doing something about it, you know, is in two levels. In terms of how many of these greenhouse gases we're putting in the atmosphere. And then there's an area that I'm not as familiar with at all, but kind of geoengineering or engineering our way out. Well, one is to try to come up with methods to take carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere and store it. And the other one, ever hear this about releasing particles into the upper atmosphere to reflect away the Earth's? It's not,
Yes. Weren't they like talking about using gold?
Is that it was different nanoparticles? I didn't know about gold, but I just knew.
I'm thinking there was gold involved in some way.
Now, if you go down, I wanted to show you this. Go down a couple slides. The guy there with the ice core, and then the next one up.
5.
Yeah, this one's fine. Yep. So this is the data that I always go to. So this carbon dioxide, which is from using fossil fuels, so coal, oil, and natural gas. And so this data, as you can see, it goes back 800,000 years. And this is one of these fantastic parts of science, that they've come up with methods where you could study the Earth's atmosphere going back 800,000 years, is what this graph is showing. So the red is the carbon dioxide concentration, and then you can see the blue is the temperature.
Yeah.
And you can just see how those correlate together, and you can see the Earth has natural cycles. So ice ages and then warming periods, and ice ages and warming periods, and you can see it's related to this carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere.
Yeah, you really can. You get
all the way over to the right, so that 0 is like this date now.
Yeah.
See how that red line just spikes.
Yeah, skyrockets.
Yep, it skyrockets, and that's where we're at right now. So since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of it would have been the development of the steam engine and burning coal and that part of industry. So when I was a boy going to college, okay, why about at that point was, so for over 100 years, there have been scientists which could look at physics and chemistry, and they could say that this carbon dioxide molecule is a powerful molecule to trap heat energy in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
That's been known for well over 100 years. So then when I was going to college, though, everyone knew about these cycles and this carbon dioxide being released. And there was a couple thoughts, though. One, that the carbon dioxide may be released at a high rate, but it would be absorbed by the oceans, so it wouldn't be in the atmosphere. And another one was, and we do know this is true, that the higher the carbon dioxide level, the faster the plant growth. And plants through photosynthesis would take up the carbon dioxide.
I was actually going to ask you about that.
Mm-hmm. But it's turned out that we humans, and we're doing great things with this, or we've done great things, right, in terms of modern civilization. And I'm talking to you on the computer and using electricity and things like that. Yeah, we've done fantastic things in terms of humans and modern societies and everything, but we've put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere much, much faster than the plants could ever take it up. And then there's a whole other pollution problem with the oceans taking up carbon dioxide because it develops into the form of a acid in the oceans.
Yeah. Well, doesn't it lose oxygen and kills, tons of fish?
Yeah. So there's two parts to that. One, the oceans have become more acidic, and especially corals. Have you heard about coral bleaching?
No.
It's the death of corals. So the corals are very, very sensitive to what the pH or acid-base balance is. The other thing is they're very sensitive to temperature. So this coral bleaching is where you think about. Yeah, have you ever got to go like scuba dive or snorkeling and stuff? Yeah. Or if we haven't, we've all got to see pick there. Yeah. Right. So, but then the death of those corals, and the death of those corals is pretty much, really been substantiated to be a combination of both the change in the acid level, which is the carbon dioxide, and then the warming temperatures at the same time.
And the coral reefs are such a home for a diverse group of sea life.
That's absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that was like when I was in college. But by now, we've got all this data, like the end of that graph, to show that these carbon dioxide levels are,
at insane levels.
Yep.
That's insane.
Yeah, they just don't show up in the fossil record, and they just don't show up with anything except and so it's so that number on the side is parts per million. Yeah. So it's 250, 300. So 400 parts per million, like where we're at right now, that's like 0.04%. But carbon dioxide, it's just the physics and the chemistry of it. It just does this wonderful, just this really extreme job of capturing heat energy.
Yeah. And so it just traps everything in.
Yes. And it stays in the atmosphere for a long time. So this cycle of plants taking up carbon dioxide, or this cycle of the carbon dioxide being absorbed by the oceans, is a very slow process. So, we could do things to stop today, and it's going to take decades and generations for anything to be balanced because of that time period. And there's so much energy in there. So, I used my car today. Did you use your car?
I did, yeah.
Okay. So, I'll raise my hand. I emitted these carbon dioxide molecules in the atmosphere. Well, that's in the gasoline, right?
Yeah.
And so this is some chemistry, but if you think of that carbon dioxide with that C on there, that's what was used to get my car down the highway. Well, if you or I would run out of gas, how many miles per gallon does your car get?
Oh, not much. It's a Jeep Cherokee. I get like 14, 15.
Oh, okay.
It's not great.
Well, that's all right, though. So what if you ran out of gas and you had to get out and push that car for those 15 miles, right?
Yeah.
This gasoline, it's really a marvelous molecule, right? That are in there in terms of how much energy can be released.
Yeah, that's true.
So if you think about, putting a gallon of gasoline in your Cherokee, but then, if you really had to do that energy to push that thing, how much work that would be. Well, the amount of energy that is trapped in the atmosphere is somewhere between 1,000 and 100,000 times greater than the energy you get out of it into your vehicle. That what I'm saying here is, that CO2 is so effective in terms of holding on to the sun's energy into the atmosphere. It's like 1,000 to 100,000 times greater than the energy released when you use the gasoline. So even though it's, this parts per million business, and we went from 280 parts per million to 400 parts per million, what's the big deal? It's a big deal because of the
effectiveness of the element.
That element, that compound is just really effective at holding it in. And if you go down a couple more slides, I'll since you were asking about that one. The one there with there's a curve there. It says
number 8.
That one right there. Yep. Okay. So this is. Have you ever seen this one, you guys?
No.
All right. So this is the really famous one. Okay. And it goes right to the point. So I'm gonna give up my age here a little bit. See how it starts there at 1958.
Yeah.
So a year before I was born, there was a scientist by the name of Keeling, and he went out to Hawaii. And he went out to Hawaii to measure carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. And he went to Hawaii. If I had my choice, I'd go do research in Hawaii.
Yeah, that wouldn't be bad.
That
would be nice.
Greenland, nice Siberia, or Antarctic. He goes off to Hawaii. And he did go out to Hawaii, though, because it was out there in the middle of the Pacific, and he wanted to measure carbon dioxide, so he wanted to get away from, human influences. Well, if you look at that, the red line on there, see how it goes up and down and up and down?
Yeah.
And you look, it's every year. And that's because here in the northern hemisphere, like right here in Kentucky, going back to your other question or point that you made, we have all the forests are green, the plants are taken off, right?
Yeah.
So taking up carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So in the summer months, that line goes down because the plants take the carbon dioxide out. But then in the winter, the leaves come off, the trees aren't green, the line goes back up. So it has that, up and down for each year. But you can clearly see what's happened since 1958 up until, this goes up to 2018. It's seasonal. That's why it's got the line going up and down, and that would be photosynthesis. And if you were in the southern hemisphere, it would be just the reciprocal of that, obviously, because they have, reciprocal seasons. But you can see the clear and steady pace of carbon dioxide increasing, and then the blue line is the temperature. Okay? So there's the data like that. There's the data that I showed you from these ice core samples of the carbon dioxide levels in going back 800,000 years. And then there's also physics that it's beyond correlation. You can show in the laboratory the characteristic of the carbon dioxide molecule. That this is what you would expect to do. And this is kind of how science works, that 100 years ago, there were individuals that could make predictions that said if the carbon dioxide levels would increase, this is what we would expect to happen to the.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, and the carbon dioxide levels have increased. And what's happened to the temperature?
Has it been their predictions? Are they accurate?
Oh, they're really good. It's
Wow.
it's
Cool.
really amazing. Yeah. So there is high levels of correlation. Yep, between the two, and
So-
that's that area of like predictive science.
Yeah. Yeah. So one question I have for you,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about how plant life, especially here, has been doing well. Could the fact that we're so big on deforestation, and especially like these big forests like the Amazon, is that also speeding up this whole process?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so here, in South America,
Yeah.
where there's been tremendous, so over decades there's been destruction, but then if you followed the news, there's been accelerated destruction.
Well, with the palm oil and stuff like that
So
has been
palm oil
awful.
from Southeast Asia, that's
Yeah,
right.
It's been devastating.
Yep, the palm oil from Southeast Asia to the Amazon rainforest in South America. So you can think about that. There's there's the greatest terrestrial place on Earth to take up carbon dioxide,
and we're destroying it.
And we're destroying it. So we're releasing carbon dioxide and then destroying the plant life that could
Absorb it. Yeah.
That takes it up. Yep.
So another question I have for you: is there any fear from scientists as to like viruses that could be, because we're dealing with viruses right now.
Yep.
So viruses within ice that could be melting into the ocean, stuff like that. Is that a kind of a fear?
I don't think of that, but I will. But there is a fear in terms of viruses with this climate change and warming patterns.
Yeah.
So for example, organisms that spread potential viruses or other types of diseases like mosquitoes. So the mosquito species that would be found in more tropical or subtropical areas, as there's global warming, those type of vectors of virus or other types of diseases can, further spread into other areas. So the main fear about, I guess we can use the word fear, or the main concern about the disease would be various types of vectors like mosquitoes and various kinds of other, insects that expand, and have greater effects on human impact. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be terrifying. So what else can we see on here?
Yeah, so actually, if you want to go, I was thinking down 2 more slides. We could do that. So this one, we've already looked at the carbon dioxide, but then here's 2 others. There's methane, and then you mentioned that in terms of like from Siberia and places with the warming temperature where the methane's being released, and that would be this snowball cascading effect.
Yeah.
That the methane is sequestered and stored away, but then because of these temperature changes it's being released, well then that just accelerates the warming temperatures, which releases even more methane gas, and then the nitrous oxide also. So the main component of the atmosphere is nitrogen gas. So 99% of the atmosphere is nitrogen and oxygen, but they don't do very much at all in terms of holding in temperatures in the atmosphere. It's those ones of the less than 1%, carbon dioxide, and then here the release of methane and nitrous oxides and you can see how they've accelerated here in those parts per million. So those are some of the other what we refer to as greenhouse gases.
Yeah, methane is even higher than the CO2.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is, also insane.
Right, and that's one area both from the release with the warming temperatures, and the other one is in terms of the way we use natural gas. And of course, I like electricity and things myself, but if there's an oil spill, you can see where the oil is, right?
Yeah.
But in the natural gas industry, if the pipe is leaking, you don't see a spill or anything like that. So one concern is, as we use more natural gas, I think we should be very careful in terms of monitoring it and having regulations about the potential leaks, because it's not the same as an oil spill, which the pollution can be readily identified, but the methane that could be leaking from some kind of fractured pipe or something like that is an impact in this climate change.
Well, is there any concern about the pollution of the waterways from, fracking and other stuff like, drilling for oil and stuff like that? Could also getting these chemicals in the water accelerate this whole warming process?
I don't know about the chemicals in the water, but the main effect on water with this topic that we're talking about right now is that as the waters warm, there's pollution events that can happen. One is that it's part of physics and chemistry. As the water temperature increases, it cannot contain as many gases, including oxygen.
Yeah.
So, like the example I do use, if you buy do you say pop or soda?
I say pop.
Okay, so you say pop, right?
What do you say?
I say pop too. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I say pop too. So, so in the summer, one would happen to have warm pop, and you have to be very careful with it. Because if you go to open it, it's not shaken up or it's just moved about a little bit, all the fizz comes out, right? Well, that's because of the warm temperature and the carbon dioxide gas does not dissolve into the water. Well, that's carbon dioxide, but the same is true of oxygen. So one of the in this area, the detrimental things that could happen to in terms of water pollution is the rising water temperature will have less oxygen, and then obviously that lower oxygen level would be critical to all sorts of aquatic life. Now the other one, have you read about these algal blooms?
No.
Well, they're a serious business. As they're kind of a twofold thing. Going back to the water pollution, there's a problem with water pollution with nutrients getting in the water. So when I first learned this, like in college, this nutrients in the water. If I hear nutrients, I think it's a good thing, right? I need these nutrients. There we go. Yep.
Oh, I have seen this before.
Yeah. So a combination of the warmer temperatures and then the nutrients. Now, in the United States, most of these nutrients are from agriculture.
Yeah.
So it's runoff from fields. So they could have chemical fertilizer out there that was supposed to be for the corn, but when the rain came, it ended up in the ditch and it goes into the streams and then the lakes and so on. But then there's certain species of this algae that produce toxins. And when they produce those toxins, it can have, there's a terrible effect.
Nick, second row, third over, there's fourth over. Is this some of the toxic stuff that they secrete?
Yeah,
or?
So that's the algae itself.
Okay.
So most of these algae are a type of algae that are actually, in the world of biology, more closely related to bacteria.
Oh, wow.
So they're called blue-green algae, and then certain species of them release toxins. And there was one slide there, just one over from that, where it said Lake Erie. That's okay. That's all right. It looked about the same. But on Lake Erie towards Toledo, a couple years ago, they had one of these blooms and they had their intake for their, metropolitan water supply. And that has hit other places too, that they have to keep track of what these algal levels are and the potential they can have on drinking water supplies.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Because, people drink from the water, cook with the water, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So do you kind of have a prediction if this is something that doesn't really get under control quickly how places like Kentucky, what would it be like here? Because like you said, the plants here are having really nice growth, stuff like that. But also with the rising of temperatures and the destruction of waterways, would it be, what would that kind of look like?
So in Kentucky, the aquatic ones and the ones we'd mentioned, but the other, I think a major one for Kentucky would be these potential for diseases that we were talking about before, from human impact to to wildlife and even forests and plants.
Yeah.
These changing temperatures, new pathogens and diseases could be introduced that would not have been without that. Now the other thing, and I don't have a slide of this, but with these models, there's various predictions for central Appalachia, including here in eastern Kentucky, that there's a higher probability that with rainfall, that there would be greater rainfall, within a shorter time period with increased risk of flooding.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not completely with all, the general thing about those models is the warmer the temperature, the more energy there is.
Yeah.
And then if you look at rainfall patterns, the moisture we get and the rains we get, most of the moisture, develops up from the Gulf of Mexico and then comes across these different weather patterns we see here. So, I've seen that data and I've seen those predictions, but one is there is a model which would show higher risk of flooding in the future, due to this climate change. So I would say among those, the water pollution that we've talked about, from the higher temperatures to the algae, to the potential risk of increased different types of pathogens, to the other one, potential, flooding that would be at a higher risk in the future.
Yeah, wow.
Mm-hmm. I don't mean to be so gloomy,
I mean, that's, it is what it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, and now if there is one, there's lots of things to do, and then I got a slide later, but with the slide that you just put up with surface mining, the efforts to reforest these mountaintop mine areas, so that is important.
I've actually been to one of a farm that had been put on a mountaintop removal area, and it was awesome. It was very
okay. Yep. There was it's been a few years now. I volunteered one Saturday with the Sierra Club. So the Sierra Club worked with, I think it was with Kentucky Power, and then another nonprofit organization, and you could go volunteer to, plant trees on one of the mountaintop reclamation areas. So if you imagine, back to this photosynthesis, what would happen then, and you mentioned the rainforest before, if you have a woody plant, it takes up the carbon dioxide, that's part of photosynthesis, so it takes it out of the atmosphere, and through the process of photosynthesis, if you have a woody plant like a tree, that carbon, which I think is just one of the amazing things that I enjoy learning about science.
Oh, yeah.
Here's this carbon dioxide molecule that we've been talking about, which is in the atmosphere. It's a gas. I'm waving my hand through it, right?
Yeah.
And this plant, like an oak tree, has this photosynthetic capacity to take this gaseous carbon dioxide, take it up through the leaf, use the energy of the sun, and turn it into wood.
Yeah.
And so once a tree takes it out of the atmosphere and it's in wood, that's that planting a tree, and whether it's the forest on the mountaintops here in Kentucky, or trying to look at the palm oil that you discussed before in Southeast Asia, or the destruction of these rainforests in the Amazon, when they can go back into forested habitat, that is a mechanism to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And it's also, those forests are habitat for living things. And,
exactly.
And the root structures are a mechanism to avoid flooding. And so with all this, why planting trees, Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So if you want to go down, I think it was this one here. Yeah. We've kind of discussed. If you want to go down to the last two slides, I'll show you my house.
Oh, wow.
So that's our house, and those are solar panels. And there's two sets on the far roof right there, the bigger panel system.
Yeah.
That's the photovoltaic system. So that's the solar panels that you hear a lot about, that they can take the energy of the sun and they can move electrons around and change it into electricity. And just kind of a side note, did you, so you've done a podcast with Tom and one with Gary, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So here's one of my little physics bits right here. This effect of light generating electricity, it's actually the research or the paper that Einstein got his Nobel Prize for.
Oh, wow.
So the science of this turning the sun into electricity goes back to the early discoveries of Einstein.
Wow.
So but then engineering and science has made these solar panels much more effective. So that panel goes into the grid. So I don't have batteries at my house. So have you studied the Elon Musk and his Powerwall?
I was actually going to ask you if this was similar to like Solar City, how he's got the solar panels that he has in the batteries, and
right,
because he has like a tile thing. It's called like Solar City, something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is this what he's using on that?
So and then what he's introduced is I think the battery is called a Powerwall.
Yeah.
Right? So what the long-term vision is that those solar panels could become effective enough, and everybody in the world of solar and alternative energy is looking for a better battery, a better way to store things, right? So that there you go. And that with that system, you would be off the grid. With that system, you would have your solar panels, and you could store that energy in the Powerwall. And so here in Eastern Kentucky, it's going to be kind of tough, because where that house sits by about even now, at the end of June and the beginning of July, by about 3:30 in the afternoon, you know how it is around here in these hills. The sun's going over the mountain, right?
Yeah, and it's.
But still, I tell people though that even a house like that in Eastern Kentucky, how effective the solar panels are. So you can
I was going to ask how much of your how much of your power is from your panels.
So that panel, what I get in electricity is about 3,000 kilowatt hours per year. Okay, so my house uses about 12,000. So
that's awesome.
I get about 1/4. So I don't, I couldn't make it without Kentucky Power. Okay. I don't have enough generation,
Yeah.
And I don't have a battery system at all. I have what they call net metering. So my system goes into the grid, and then I have an additional meter, and then I get credit for the electricity.
For what you send back.
Yep, I get credit for what I send back. So and so that's the system that most people have, because you have to have a very modern solar system, and you have to have a house situated in such a place that you get a lot of sunlight.
Sun coverage, yeah. Well, could that be something that we do for these mountaintop removal areas?
Now that's been proposed. I really don't know what the status is. I know there was a proposal in Pike County, and I'm really not. So the other thing that happens with alternative energies like wind and solar, the most sun and the best wind is in the less populated parts of the country. So if you had a chance, of you guys, to travel out west across Interstate 80 or Interstate 40, what would be Route 66 in the good old days? You ever go out that way?
I've been to California, but I flew there.
Okay.
I've not gotten to drive, through the Midwest and stuff like that.
So if you would like get a chance, when this COVID thing is over someday, right, and we can get out and travel and be comfortable about it, why if you would like go through northern Texas or across Kansas, or if you get to the into the Sierra Nevadas of California, I mean, if you drive across Texas, those great big huge windmills that I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they are, if you're along the interstate traveling through the Great Plains of the United States, from the interstate, mile after mile, they're going to be in the number of the thousands. It's these massive, like that. And so you go across through Texas there and places. So and if you ever do get to travel through there, it's windy, it's flat and windy all the time. But, it's a low population density. So one of the parts of physics is that when you have to transfer the energy through the power lines, the farther you transmit it, the more energy you lose.
Yeah.
So, it's the windmills are fantastic, but, out there, in the middle of Kansas and in the plains of Texas, there's not many people there. And the same is kind of true for solar, that where you have the greatest deserts in the world, obviously people don't live there.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to transmit the energy and move it to another place. But the technology in these areas has really advanced. Now there is one area, from a conservation point of view, and I'm sure you've heard about, and the engineers are working together with biologists on this, would be like bird kills with windmills.
Well, that's all that I've ever heard anybody say bad about windmills, is that it kills X amount of birds,
Yeah, and they do, but they've gotten so much better at picking out locations where you don't have large migratory areas, and I hope, and then the larger birds of prey, but for like the smaller songbirds and things like that, it is bad, and it's terrible, but it's really a small number compared to the number of birds that are killed by cats.
Yeah, I was going to say cats. Nick, Google how many birds cats kill. It's like in the millions. Yeah.
Now, of course, the cats aren't getting eagles or anything like that.
Yeah.
But in terms of
small
songbirds, in terms of the effect on the songbird population, it would be there. See that?
3.7 billion. I thought it was million. It's billion.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I mean, there's some debate there, but in terms of using these alternative mechanisms to get energy. Now, the other panel there, the one that's a little bit closer, that one is for my hot water tank.
Oh, that's cool.
So what that does, I think it's about a 5x7 panel, and it's got pipes going through there with water running through it. And then I have an 80-gallon hot water tank. And the hot water tank I have was designed to hook up to a solar system. So on these, obviously, if you just think about that for a minute, these hot days we've been having, how much heat energy is on your roof, right?
Yeah.
So what that system does is there's a little pump on the side of my hot water tank, and it collects the heat energy up there in that panel. This one does not make electricity. This one just transfers the heat from your roof, and on my hot water tank there's a little heat exchanger, and it takes that heat and it warms up the hot water. So my hot water tank, my whole house is electric, and the hot water tank is an electric hot water tank. But then what happens is in the wintertime, of course, I don't it'd be pretty cold showers if I depended on this system. So my hot water tank, it does have a heating element in it, but here at home we have kind of fun about what date we can turn the circuit breaker off. So what we try to go for is like by the middle of April that I can turn the circuit breaker off on the hot water tank. That April until like the middle or the end of September, that we can get our hot water without using, electric.
That's awesome. That has to be incredibly useful as far as like bills.
Yeah. So that would be So that's one of those mechanisms, that kind of fills that need for storage, because it's the hot water is stored so that we can take a shower in the evening and things like that. And it was the sun's energy that stored it up during the day, and then we use it at night. Now obviously when it's cold here with short day length in winter, there's not enough energy on my roof to heat. So I do have my hot water tank has a heating element in it, a conventional one, so that we can have a hot shower in the winter time. But during the summer, that's kind of the fun part, that from April to about the beginning of October, why that panel right there is using the heat energy, that's on the roof on the hot days of summer, for a hot water tank. And then if you go to the very last slide on this clip, that one, that box right there, it comes off the roof as DC, so that's the converter on the left right there, and that converts it into AC, and then you can see on the right there would be the Kentucky Power meter, and that's the net metering aspect of it. So my component, which is really for where we live, the technology, really isn't feasible quite yet for Elon Musk here in Eastern Kentucky, unless you happen to live in an open open valley. To get enough electricity to get through the night, or cold winter nights, or using air conditioning on hot summer days, for that battery to last you through you could be off the grid. But that's kind of an interesting economical, political point. If the technology got to the point where you would make this investment in a system, but you wouldn't be on the grid anymore, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't have an electric bill, and it's an interesting political one, because both from the environmental point of view, but then also from another political point of view, where you're not you're really independent. You're not dependent
upon the government.
Yeah. And it's the government regulations in terms of the electric company, but there's kind of a thought in the future. How many people would go to that system? If you could have your own system and not worry about, and then you wouldn't worry about lines going down in ice storms either.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that would definitely be something that I would do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that for some people in some places the technology is there, but most places it's not quite there. We don't get enough sunlight, and it's still pretty expensive.
Well, do you think with like mass adoption of this that we see every year technology grows exponentially, and do you think with like mass adoption of something like this that we would see this industry sort of kind of catch up?
I do, and here is the example I think of sometimes. Again, when I was a boy going to school, this calculator that didn't do too many things, right?
Yeah.
Cost like $100 or something, right? And so in the world of, you've seen it like with just new cell phones coming out and computers and things like that. What happens in the world? So this alternative energy stuff is like a technology field. So it's I see it much different.
It definitely is.
Yeah, I see it as so much different from ExxonMobil and natural gas companies and things like that.
It is different.
Tech. And what happens with tech over time at a very fast rate is you get more for less money, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I see. And that there'll be a technology to make it more efficient, and the cost will continue to come down. So just like it did when the calculators came out like that when I was in junior high or something like that, and just to watch them advance. And then I was going to graduate school when PCs were first coming out and that sort of thing, and it would just be the students didn't have them, So yes, I do see it. And the reason I think that is because I see it more as a technology than a traditional energy company.
Well, it's such, solar panels and stuff are even used in, well, not really used yet, but I guess they are kind of used in space with the movement of, different things, satellites and telescopes.
Well, that's what the space station relies on. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So do you, if we, Garrison and I, when we were talking to Gary, he was talking about, we're kind of on this precipice of a new space race, space exploration type thing. And do you think maybe as that grows, that technology will help increase the technology for batteries and solar panels, stuff like that?
Yeah, no, this is a little bit outside of my field.
Yeah.
But I do. Yeah. Because, for that type of research and engineering that goes into that is where they find those efficiencies, right?
Yeah.
So I very much think the type of things they discover and learn from the efficiencies of using those solar panels for that type of advanced technology works its way,
down to us,
into a house in Eastern Kentucky, like the picture we're looking at,
That's very cool.
And so what do you want to do anything about? I'm fine, but do you want to?
We'll go as long as you want.
So you want to do a little bit of water before we sign off? Okay, so if you want to go to the other set of slides. So this is an organization. So this is an environmental group, the Kentucky Waterways Alliance, and it's a group I've been with for a long time, a nonprofit, and we work on and address water quality issues throughout Kentucky. So there's lots of environmental groups that are all doing lots of good things, but ours is the group that focuses on water issues. And if you go to the next slide, I'll show you. So, and I just picked up this slide, but especially here in the hills and valleys of Eastern Kentucky, everything eventually is going to be in the river, right?
Yeah, yeah, everything.
And where do you live?
Well, right now I live in Winchester, but I'm from Prestonsburg.
Oh, okay. So we depend on. So you're on the Prestonsburg City Water Supply, or?
Yeah, yeah.
So their intake is there by Adams Middle School, and so the drop of water that goes into the big sandy watershed, that flows north toward the Ohio River, it's going to be, that part of the watershed that goes through the big sandy through Prestonsburg that's our water supply, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So whatever happens in those hills and valleys, from a human health point of view, it's critical. Then another thing is, if you measure water quality, you're measuring like the whole watershed. You're finding out what's happening in the mountains and the hills and the houses and the valleys and other places, because it will end up.
It drains down.
Yep, and it drains down there, and so that's our kind of motto, that we that work on water quality issues, whether you know it or not, you live in a watershed.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if you're on a city water supply in Prestonsburg, it's from the river. Where I grew up in Northeast Ohio, the water table was really high, and even a lot of the small towns didn't have a municipal water supply. We all had wells in the backyard. But then those wells in the backyard, it was northeastern Ohio, and it's a heavy agriculture area. So, what I've thought about since is the pesticides and the fertilizers and the chemicals that the farmers in that area use, it ends up in the creek. But for a lot of people, they get well water, and it also ends up in the wells. And so, now a little bit of a history lesson. If you go to the next slide, are you familiar with 1969 in Cleveland, Ohio?
No.
Okay. So Cleveland is where the Cuyahoga River comes in, and so the river was so polluted that, and it didn't happen just one time. So I have this date, June 22nd, 1969, but it happened multiple times. They had problems in Cleveland with the river catching on fire.
Oh man. Well, that reminds me of when fracking first came around and people were lighting the water from their faucets on fire.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. That's terrifying.
So the environmental movement that developed in the 60s and then into the 70s with environmental legislation, part of it was prompted by, when the river is so polluted that you have to call the fire department, there could be a problem.
Yeah.
So if you go to the next slide, I put on a couple things there about, and so they've done a lot of great work though in the Cuyahoga River and Lake Erie. So that particular blaze was a couple hours, and it's stuck with the American public. And I put one comment in about Cuyahoga and what could happen. But that and other parts, if you go maybe 2 slides down, I'll point out another one. So you recognize the gentleman on the left there, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So the gentleman's name is Ruckelshaus, and he was the first administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. So most of the federal legislation that we have now to protect the environment was during the Nixon administration. So from the formation of the EPA to the legislation of the Clean Water Act and the Clean Drinking Water Act and a number of other pieces of legislation. So what I sometimes I mean, if one doesn't know very much history, if we say Richard Nixon, what comes to our mind is...
Well, that's what I was going to say. We only hear the bad things about things.
We only hear Watergate. Now, I really don't know how much of a true environmentalist he was. Actually, we should have Professor Majacek comment on this in the future.
He loves Nixon.
It kind of tells us about the time that you could have a Republican president, Richard Nixon, who was very much also a foreign policy and, with the Vietnam War and things like that going on, that he would address these environmental issues. Yeah. And I think what it speaks to is that there was such an environmental movement at that time, and there was so much going on in the general public in terms of their concern about, what have we done when the river catches on fire?
Yeah.
That there would be the kind of legislation that there is with the Environmental Protection Agency and the legislation. So I kid sometimes. The other great movement in the environmental movement was Teddy Roosevelt.
I love Teddy's my guy.
Okay.
So great public land. He's national parks. That's my guy.
Yep. So most people like Professor Majacek, professors to other people, and like you just said, he's your guy. In terms of recognizing an environmental movement in the country, they would say Teddy Roosevelt. Well, I would say that next to Teddy Roosevelt, the greenest, most environmental, active president we had in history would be Richard Nixon.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, because that legislation and that movement was, during his presidency. Now, with the time we have, if this sounds okay to you, if we go down a few slides, I had one slide that had it's almost toward the end. It has right there below the garden picture, the one your arrow's on now. Yep. Yep. So I just wanted to, in terms of our streams here, okay, and how healthy is a stream and how do you measure streams? So that first one here in eastern Kentucky, the bacteria and fecal, that's the biology word for poop, right?
Yeah.
So that would be, sadly, in eastern Kentucky, the contamination of having, in coliform is a particular category of bacteria. So having these bacteria in the streams is from untreated or not functioning septic systems is where that would come from. If we were in an agricultural area, it would probably be from the cows, right?
Yeah.
But just the way it is here, if you go out to a stream, most streams, you're going to find relatively high levels of this bacteria, fecal coliform, and it would, be from septic systems. The dissolved oxygen, that's the one I was talking to you about before.
Yeah.
That goes down when the temperature goes up. So one thing I like to tell folks, like so many of us have a small stream, we live along a small stream or something like that, or even if you live along the river, those trees are so valuable to the aquatic life in that river. I mean, there's lots of reasons why, but one is on these hot, sunny days, they provide cooling, right?
Yeah, it's like the shade.
It's in the shade, and that cooler temperature with the higher oxygen level is critical to, having a healthy stream that you could have. So, and then the next one, there's been a lot of work done in the years, but pH and in our area, most of that, was from mining activities.
Yeah.
So the mines would release different kinds of minerals that would make for, it's referred to as acid mine drainage. So, but there's been a lot of work done there. Now the conductivity is what it sounds like. So there's all sorts of things you can measure in a stream, but there's one that's been found to be like, it's like a lot of things. If you had one number that could explain lots of things, that would be something nice to work with. And this conductivity is what it sounds like, how well an electric current moves through the water. And there's a little device to measure this quite easily. And what it really amounts to is, the more pollution there is from different sources, the conductivity is higher. I bet you've seen this on those TV commercials. Have you seen like Zero Water?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be, they've removed all the minerals in their filtering system. So
wouldn't you need minerals in your water?
Now you do. That's exactly right. So you need minerals. And what there would be like a particular number that would be for a healthy stream.
Yeah.
So the only thing that really, you can have those filtering systems, or if you had distilled water from the grocery store, I mean, it would be down to zero. But you're exactly right that the other healthy parts you do, that's part of the natural part of a stream. But from different types of pollution activities, including mining, why this conductivity, it goes up to a certain number, and then it's like you don't find little critters in the stream anymore. The nitrogen and phosphorus, that's mostly from agriculture is the big one. I mean, it would be also from like septic systems, but the biggest one in the United States is fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides. Obviously, they speak for themselves. The temperature is what I meant to you before. Yeah, I don't know when it'll change, but when it rains, what color is the river?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not supposed to be brown. So that's just solid turbidity. That's erosion. That's not natural. And then the last one on the list right there. There's certain species of organisms that you can look for in the water, and they're indicators of the health of a stream. So they're invertebrates, so crayfish and things like that fall into this category. The macro means that they're big enough you really don't need a microscope to see them. So crayfish and other types of invertebrates, you can go into a stream, you can kick up the pebbles and cobbles and things like that, and look.
I used to catch them all the time as a kid.
Okay, yeah,
yeah,
and then what happens is particular species you find, or sadly if you don't find them, that would be if you don't find particular species, they'd be an indicator of pollution. But if you do find this healthy population of different kinds of macroinvertebrates, then it's an indicator that this is a
healthier.
This little stream's pretty healthy. That's right.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So, what your time is like, or if you got any questions along the way? I kept talking a lot.
No, this has been great. So what would you say to people besides, check the data or whatever? What would you say to people that do not believe that climate change is happening and that we are accelerating that whole process?
Now you said, check the data. That's the first thing I do. I got the graphs, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like we have the information. Yeah.
I got the graphs to show you. And it's really, it's really, and then, I just picked out Miami Beach, but, look up stuff for, the city engineers that are doing planning on coastal areas, places like that. And then the other, this is a global issue, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is.
That's the other thing to get our, if there's anything, we can change our minds about trade with other countries and immigration policies and things like that. But when it comes to the environment and when it comes to the Earth's atmosphere, it's global. Okay.
It affects everybody.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the first one but look at these numbers.
Yeah. Hey, check this out.
Look at the graph. I got the graph right here. So.
Well, a lot of people talk about how, this was in the earlier 2000s. Mm-hmm. I believe it was 2001 when Al Gore, after he lost the presidential race, and he started his environmental work, and he made the movie, and he was talking about how Florida would be underwater. And we've passed that point, and people always bring that up. And that's what I was kind of getting at earlier. As we get in more data, do you think that these models and stuff need to be redone with current data?
Yeah, and they constantly are.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that point up because that's the way science works.
Yeah, exactly.
You
put an idea and then...
Yeah, and then
people berate that idea until it's,
Mm-hmm. And so sometimes science will be accused of manipulating the data.
Yeah.
But what one does with the data, is work to make it more meaningful or do experiments, in different directions. So that's right. In terms of I know. Well, I'll tell you one in the environmental movement. Do you ever hear of a book called The Population Bomb?
No.
So there's a Stanford biologist, and I think it was about 1968. And it was part of this environmental movement. Of course, Nixon was elected in 1968.
Yeah.
But during that 60s, he wrote this book called The Population Bomb. And there we go. He would have made predictions from the book you see right there, that the human population was increasing at such a rate that I forget exactly what his dire prediction was, but he didn't, he predicted not too far in the future there would be mass starvation and horrific consequences. And
well, we are kind of seeing that now.
Well, there's two things. Yeah. So we see that, and one of the things, in terms of how the world and developed countries, one of the other things that happened, though, that the U.S. has been, I mean, the farmers, in terms of how much food they can produce, have done fantastic, right? You know, I mean, the colleges of agriculture, like at the University of Kentucky, and the farmers and the people, they've been able to produce, you know, food that Paul Ehrlich would have never imagined. But back to that, see the nitrogen and phosphorus on there, and the pesticides and the herbicides.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so it's been at a cost, right?
Mm.
So it's been at a cost. Now the other thing, Paul Ehrlich, that's a little bit outside of science, that he didn't recognize, the birth rate has come down dramatically since 1968. So, like, here was a scientist at Stanford that wrote a book with a really an alarming title, right? The population.
Yeah.
And this gets a little bit, there were certain things about Al Gore that were very alarming, that the time was short and that sort of thing. But like Paul Ehrlich, it did not include how we would have advances in agriculture to produce more food per acre. And it did not include the sociology aspects that families would be having fewer children, you know, those things together. So now that I picked that one just because that one's, you know, one that was in the news in terms of a criticism of science.
Yeah.
But you always work, you know, you get the data and you do the experiments, and science does, you know, it's not raw. You know, we don't hold it up as like the stone tablet. That's the whole idea. It's not. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
That you put it out there and it's criticized, and you come up with a better model, and you better explain things. You know, and you don't keep it a secret. You make it public, and everyone gets an opportunity to see it and criticize it. So,
Well, if science was a stone tablet, then there would not be any advancement.
that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the whole idea.
And I think that's kind of a common misconception that people have.
Yep. And then back to the data, why in the Enlightenment period, and it still existed, the Royal Society of Great Britain, I don't know how to say it in Latin, but their motto is something to the effect, take no one's word for it. You know?
Yeah.
You don't take anyone's word for it. You show me the numbers, you do the experiment, you look at the data. So,
That's really cool. I think that's a good way to end it.
Okay, with the Royal Society.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope it was, the time went really quickly for me.
Yeah, this was awesome. This was really cool.